Has anyone noticed, without me pointing it out, that there would seem to be an increase and some sort of need for me to tell you more faster? And it's not just more and it's not just faster, but I should tell you more faster with less apparent ordinary explanations, comparisons, justifications, even ostensible attempts at proof. We got new big drawing paper. Let me draw it for you again to remind you sort of where we are. Remember the state. If you would try, with our new nice board and paper, if you would try at least to picture this three-dimensionally. Paper itself. Picture this whole thing I'm drawing at least three-dimensionally, and anybody that's any good, try and picture it four-dimensionally. Like the tail of a comet, but it would have to be an omni-comet. But try and picture this at least three-dimensionally. Of there being the state of every individual inside, and but in the paper three-dimensionally would be representing the body of life, sort of. And within everyone's state, you have what would seem to take up almost all the room. You remember what I've been calling the city. And in that you've got everything accepted by humanity now as being the reality parts of humans. Anything in any other state, in any other city, whatever it's called, conscious mind, unconscious mind, spirit, soul, personality, whatever it's called, it lives in the city. City is the people. The city is not the buildings, not the sidewalks. It's the people in there. All of the people in the world live in the city. You got the institutions in the cities, which of course are no more than larger reflections molecularly still of man himself. So in the city you've got everything. You've got all the we's, and you've got all the me's, you've got all the teams, you've got all the different neighborhoods. And then, as I was describing, still if you can try and picture it three-dimensionally, there seems to be an area in almost everybody. There definitely is in you people. But in everybody that I was calling the bushes. It's sort of an unknown, unused territory, and it's out here where I keep of late referring to revolutionary activity. The revolutionists, would-be revolutionists, the recruits themselves. In the city, remember, you've got all of the me's, you got all the institutions, you got all the teams, all the neighborhoods, you got all of the everythings. I'm going to talk more about the city and what appears to be problems of the city, attitudes of people living in the city. But the state in the ordinary city, you should understand, is a living example of the 3D world. Every state, that is, every person on this planet, is a living example of it. Internally, what seems to be their own city, what seems to be their own internal population, what seems to be their own ruling powers, what seems to be the binary struggle over power, what seems to be their own institutions, which from one view would be what ordinary people would refer to as your cultural background, your religious influences, etc. But it is all in each person. It is a living example of 3D reality. And while I was mentioning it, the institutions I keep referring to also of late when I'm using this kind of example, with a capital I, the institutions all the way from medicine, the law, commerce, the military, the arts, the sciences. People accept the institutions of man as being something, and they accept it with no analyzation as being something that they really are not. It serves a purpose for them to be accepted that way, but since I pointed it out or mentioned it in passing when I drew the state again, do understand the church, commerce, banking, the military, the press, they are people. The church is not buildings. The church is not pulpits. The church is not books. Banks are not money. Banks are not cages. The military is not guns, is not weapons. If you take people out, individual people, if you take them out of the military, what have you got? You got some rust collectors, but guns are not going to fire themselves. If you take people out of the church, with a capital C, you still have the books, you still have the hardware for the rituals, but you take the people out, you got nothing. The institutions are people, not just in some theoretical, not just in some broad sense. They are the people. They are in no wise buildings. They are in no wise the press, for instance, is in no wise some elusive thing called freedom or spread of information. It's certainly not printing material, ink, presses, paper. It is always people, always. The institutions would be more rightly approached if you consider that they are magnified reflections, but they are still molecular. If there is an organism, if there is a living being that we could call the press, it would be a collection of people, not a collection of machines, not even a collection of people and machines. To hell with the machines. It's the people. The church is not as beautiful as the buildings and stained glass and et cetera may be. When you say the church, you're going to line up a group of people, men and women, not buildings. They don't have to be there. That is not the church. Weapons are not the military. Fortified buildings are not commerce. They're not the banks. It is all people. And it seems to be, though, without the correct, or without the revolutionary attempt to analyze it, to even look at it, institutions seem to be something other than what I have described. And it does not require that you individually have ever thought specifically contrarily. But let me ask you this. Assuming that you followed some of what I said and that even some of the people in you, one or two of the people in you might go, well, yeah, that's true, I guess. Then let me ask you this. Why is it that when you think of something as being an institution like the church, even if for a second I've got some of your attention and you did agree that it did seem obvious when you look at it that way, that the church is not the buildings, as beautiful as they may be and they may appeal to the senses, but the church in no wise consists of buildings. It's people. That's the beginning and that's the end of it. All right, I got that for a second. Then let me ask you, why is it that to the people, the institutions are so much more worthy of at least two good things, and one of them is reverence and the other is fear, or reverence/fear, reverence and or fear, more so than any individual, more so than if the mind was thinking of a collection of individuals, more so even than people who may be obviously connected or be a part of the institution, that still, without this kind of unnatural analyzation, if you are thinking, speaking, dreaming of, imagining the church, for instance, the church, whatever that seemed to have meant to your nervous system, it is worthy of much more reverence and or fear than any individual, the head rabbi of the world, the Pope, a collection, the Knights Templar, a whole bunch of rabbis with machine guns. Any group of individuals, any individual. But if you separate humans, singularly, collectively, or a collection of singulars, and you've got them over here and you say, all right, that's the church, from one viewpoint you're right, or that's the military, or that's the banking system. And then over here, you have got whatever my general impression was before I started listening to you of what the church represents. Just this kind of vague thing, the institution of the church, before you try to analyze it to death. The institution of the church is something else. I mean, it's something else. I don't know how to describe it until you started with playing with words here. But the institution of the church, by God, is something else. And that's something not to be screwed with. And you're right. The College of Cardinals, the popes, everybody else, you can put them over here, and it's not the same feel. I mean, that's a bunch of people, and they may be good people, they try to be good people, but they are not the church. And by God, they are, except the way things are wired up, the way things are arranged, and all ordinary people, that is, all the people back in the city, the institutions of anything, demand more reverence and or fear than any collection of people. What is life up to? I also remind you along the way, when I ask these kind of questions, these kind of topological questions, but why is this so? What could life possibly be up to? And it's my attempt, in one way, to make you curious and are aware, but to make you curious of why things, time and again, of course I'm going to hint you in the city there is no limit to this, but at least when I bring it up, time and again, there seems to be a finite, very small number, limited number, of available possibilities of how things seem to manifest themselves over and over. Why? Of course, very often it seems to be two. Sometimes it's three, sometimes it's four. Can you imagine there being less than four directions? Now, come on, folks, we've all got a small operational yellow circuit. I can draw out the sphere, or I can just stand here and us trying to imagine, trying to locate oneself in a three-dimensional universe and divide up, at least draw a two-dimensional representation of it and split it up like a good pie into three parts. And there'll be three directions. And we could all, surely, but you could theoretically go, yeah, that'd work. I mean, there's no reason why not. Or we could have 6 directions or 8. But by God, isn't 4 just right? There could be some real would-be Sharpie here that go, well, some of that I bet's got to do with habit, that's all we've heard about and we can't think otherwise. Nah, none of you would think that. No. So I don't have to deal with that. But it should make you curious as to why, not just because of my term, because that's always open if you can find exceptions to my number, to my term, but it still strikes you if you're listening over and over if I point out something. And I say, now describe it, that the institutions seem to either be worthy of more reverence or fear. Right, there's a number, that there seems to be 2 things at the institutions that just vibrate to your nervous system. And it seems right that, yeah, compared to the individual, compared to General X or Pope Y, the military itself, my concept, my unanalyzed concept of the military, the church, is so far removed in size, effect, potential. The essence of it is so far removed from one person or a whole bunch of little generals that you're right, it's that you can't compare. It's like they're two different things when looked at from one view. They're the same thing. They got to be. And it would seem that the institutional idea of it, effect of the unanalyzed description of some collection of people being the institution of the marketplace, the military, the church, does strike one as being worthy of either more reverence or demanding that you be more fearful. And that covers it, by God. You should find that. I'm trying to help you people that want something to do. You should find that, and there's no word other than this, curious. Not curious in a city sense, because in the city people are not really curious. They're trying to make a new name for themselves, get ahead, and so they try to invent something. Try to invent toothpaste that tastes like bourbon and still doesn't give you a hangover. Try to invent a pill that tastes like chocolate and your body just absolutely cannot absorb. But people in the city are not curious. You should find it curious. Even if they were curious, if you're going to argue with me, they wouldn't be curious about stuff like this. But why does it seem to be that the institutions, that there's a limited number of ways to describe if our concept of the institution did exist, or it seems to exist apart from people? Then why does there seem to be two ways to describe what the different effect would seem to be, what it appears to be? Why two? Why not more? Why does two seem just right? And you can't imagine there any more. You can't even think what an example would be. But if you took away one of those, it wouldn't be right. If you said, all right, the concept, the hardwired mechanical concept in the people of an institution as opposed to individuals, the individuals of the institution, seems to be, without any doubt, deserving, demanding of more reverence than the concept of the individuals. Maybe you hear that and go, yeah. Now saying that covers it, that's it. And if there's anybody sharp around like the kid, they could think, wait, well sometimes you could just say that they're more frightening. That the institution of the military is more frightening than the concept of one general. I've sat down, I've been at a banquet with a general. I've had generals on both sides of me, and hell, once you got talking, crap, they were interested in the NFL strike. They were interested in just everyday affairs. One of them said they liked heavy metal music, believe it or not. But the concept of the military is frightening. But you get down to it, all right. And so there would seem to be that I left one out. But of course I did not leave one out. But why? You should be curious. Why does there seem to be an absolute limited number of possible ways that a thing can manifest itself? Why? And of course there's a stickier question that's real hard to even be put in words, is why are things arranged in such a way that somebody like me can even ask this question and it seems to have any validity? Yeah. Why that's sticky, that question is really, why are things? Now the first order of that would be, why are things as they are? I was going to save you from that. But then the second order is, why are things? If things are to where they can be described, you're still dealing with a kind of contrast I wasn't really going into tonight. But as long as you've got a contrast, then you can describe something. Then you can apparently see it, then you can apparently talk about it, and of course then, without any doubt, you have a question. If nothing else, the question is, well, why does this seem to stand out more than that? Why is this one taller than, well, we certainly won't go into that. Along the same lines of me talking about the institutions, let me point out something a little more specific even, is that anything that the people can imagine, can design, can construct and operate that is an external, an institution, a mode of action, goods, the full range of stuff, human stuff, material and otherwise. All of these externals, any of them, that are all-encompassing topography, in the externals, all of the externals that the people can imagine, can design, construct, and operate are limited to, nobody ever analyzes this, they are absolutely limited to being direct reflections of the people's internals. That's it. You in no wise can invent, design, discover, even apparently through serendipity. But you cannot, no scientist, no philosopher, no one can even imagine all the way, notice again, I covered it, the spectrum from imagine to construct and operate. You cannot even imagine anything external that is not a direct reflection of you, your internals. That's it. You try and imagine the strangest creature. I'll just imagine a creature. We couldn't develop it. You couldn't operate it. So what will the strangest be? Ooh, a flying pig, I guess. Again, right? A flying pig. Or even if you think that you can get down to a more material level of trying to develop something, an invention, a labor-saving device. It's already in here. To say that you have invented something, even on paper, to say that you have imagined something that does not exist is a lie. You cannot imagine something. You cannot say that I can draw a picture, I can draw out a sketch for an invention that does not exist. No one's ever seen it, it has never existed. It's not true. It exists in you, and if it exists in you in the city, it exists in a lot of other people. Even if you're the first one to verbalize it in this specific way. Everyone else who hears it, everyone else that you can describe it to and say what your invention is, they've seen it before. What this amounts to is something else. Is it ends up that there is a kind of concrete paradigm that's always right before us. Everything that's been invented, from that camera that's filming me to this podium, styrofoam cups, weaving of materials, natural, man-made, such as man-made being unnatural. I know, kid, but I'm not going into that again tonight. There is, I use the word concrete as an adjective to paradigm. It leaped up into my little brain and pointed out that it was literally and otherwise a splendid adjective, because there is a kind of concreteness to the paradigms I'm talking about in the city. The buildings, bridges, are a kind of, right before your eye, unhidden paradigm of man's internals. But everything, the concrete paradigm, is also such things as would apparently be non-material concepts, institutions, concepts of institutions, theories that one neighborhood in the city will even say, listen, we've heard such and such theory, and it's almost beyond us intellectuals here in this neighborhood even finding fault with it, because it's really so spurious. It is such a sophistic idea that it really doesn't exist, which is not true. It is a concrete paradigm of some sizable segment of the city. It is not one man's insane idea. If anybody else hears it, they don't have to agree. If anybody else hears it and goes, hey, that's nuts, then you've got two people that's living examples of it. At least you take it all as being some vague parable. Let me also point out that the automobile engine is a reflection of man's internals. Television is. The vacuum cleaner is. Carpet is. Chairs are. Thus you are surrounded in the city, and no one notices it. You are surrounded by concrete examples of what man is. And yet from the general civilized, wired up view, they don't analyze it this way, but it'd be easy to get them to say this, because there are parts of you that will say this, that once I tried to turn their attention a certain way, would say that there reaches points, many points, wherein what seems to go on in man, his soul, his spirit, a Wankel rotary engine. And they are. Where did it come from? Where did the concept of brick come from? Where did the idea of a wall come from? Of course, we're not going any further back right now to who we work for. But you got to remember, everybody's working for somebody. It's all business. Everybody is somebody else's bottom line. You're the bottom line, of course. If I move fast enough, I'll get around to another piece of this tonight or some other time, but you're the bottom line in the sense that you are working for some level, some dimension, one above you, and therefore your employer. Just one way of putting it. The ruling power of you, the real control over your level is always invisible. But I assure you that everybody is somebody else's bottom line. Of course, humans believe here and there, are made to believe, that they've got some people that are their bottom lines. But it doesn't really pay to push that a lot. Or else you can end up writing poetry about the all-pervasiveness of melancholy in the life of man, or how famous people oftentimes have the blues in private and that kind of thing. I want to talk some more about the city, now about some specific things that may or may not be concrete. In the city, as in any city, you've got different neighborhoods. If the city was the minor league teams, which of course it is, but if we were talking that way, I'd say within the league you've got all these various teams. But in the city you've got all these neighborhoods, and they seem to be broken down, as you should be able to imagine, on nationalistic, religious, racial lines, and nowadays otherwise. It gets more and more complex. In the city, the people in any given area, in any neighborhood, have other neighborhoods in the city that they fear/hate. That is a fact. That is a fact in every city. That is another manifestation of the binary nature of living in the city. That there are neighborhoods, no matter which neighborhood you came from, no matter which neighborhood you find yourself born into, there are other neighborhoods that you have either experienced firsthand or it's been experienced and talked about enough that you accept it. You had no choice. We're still not talking about a postnatal learning experience, whatever the city people believe that still is. But wherever you were born, you know for a fact, by the time you have reached the majority age, that there are other neighborhoods that are almost diametrically opposed, and therefore are to be feared and are hated, to the general beliefs, mindset, rituals, behavior of your neighborhood. Now, this is the nature of the city. If that were not so, you would not have the slogan of all good cities. That is, we never sleep, we never close. If you didn't have that sort of thing, some cities would close. Your city would close. Sometimes the noise would go away. You could even go to sleep without dreaming and be able to do it without exploding. The city never closes because the neighborhoods do not trust each other. They cannot trust each other. And you people know now, I have slipped. I know it may not be very subtly, but I have slipped. We're not talking about that the Muslims have got to sleep with one eye open because there's a Jewish neighborhood around the corner. I'm talking about something else now. Forget all the isms. How about just all of the different beliefs and opinions? But in the city, one neighborhood cannot trust the other. If they did, the neighborhood's dying. One of them is. Then they'll both die. Then the city is going to begin to rot. For a city to stay viable, exciting, the neighborhoods fear and hate one another. But now let me point out a few other things about my drawing. We've got this area, as I said, it exists in all men, varying degrees of awareness, that all people in all cities are aware of the fact that somewhere in their state, that there seems to be an area just outside their city limits that I've been calling the bushes. Now, at first, you might have some voices in you that think, well, I bet they kind of either fear or hate the bushes. Nay, nay. By and large, the people are rather indifferent to this, what shall we call it, unincorporated area. That's too legal, too technical. This sort of uncharted, this underdeveloped, right out at the city limits, right out at the extremes, the extreme area from the center of town, from the center of the city, that most people seem to wander. And of course, by wander, we don't mean. We mean that up here, down in the lab, as far away as I seem to get from sort of home base, from the center of the bell curve, from the dugout, about as far as they go, they feel like the city limits, things get a little strange. And other than me leaving it and saying that they are rather indifferent in general, then I could also point out from another view that is the area, albeit in a state of flux throughout history and open to change. This area, I could point out, is the source of the people in general having ideas of gods external to them, not to be found there in the city. The gods are always somewhere else. And they've got to be. The reason I started out saying that they are rather indifferent about this area is the people do not believe that they can become gods. The idea of a god is not that there's some real smart people out here hiding in the bushes, out in the area that I don't really go out there, I don't know how to go out there, I don't have friends that go out there. Oh, I've read books. I know that there are books that people claim they've been there, and I don't know if there are books about theory, and some people say that when you die, maybe you go out there. Or maybe out there comes in here. The idea is, that I'm trying to point you in general toward, when I say that they're rather indifferent, is they do not believe that there is anything of any personal, anything that is potentially personally profitable to them. That this might be the area that we could start calling all the way from the unapproachable heights of Mount Olympus to the Christians' good old idea of heaven, or the Muslims' idea of a physical paradise somewhere up there before they started the NASA program. But it has not ever been viewed by the people as being an area where there's any potential benefit to the people. That is not the attitude of the people anywhere at any time. That there could be no benefit in going out there. It would not turn you into a god. That there is nothing that could be personally directed toward me in a beneficial manner. There is nothing that any of us individually could gain from going out there in that uncharted territory. Some people like to read about it, and they believe that they're reading about it in our day and time. Stories about Atlantis, stories about astrology, stories about spiritualism, talking to the dead, unidentified flying bush objects. And, of course, all the way back to ideas of the gods, that God talks to me. When he's on the phone to Oral, he talks to me. That spirits talk to me, cosmic forces talk to me, dead Indians talk to me. All of this I can, and to get a little more technical, the idea of unconscious motivations, a subconscious mind in us. Less civilized, what was it? I lost my Freud expertise after all these years of bad-mouthing the poor man. The uncivilized, the id, the libido, the sides that don't really live in the city, the aspects of us, you don't have to use spiritual terms since we're all up-to-date pseudo-college attendees now. But those psychological terms are now still pointing at the bushes. This area within everyone, within their state, that seems to be a little area around the periphery that within me is not fully chartered. I remember the first time or the only time somebody slipped me a little LSD once. Well, if you're really civilized, maybe somebody just slipped you a little vodka in the church punch once. And it was as though something in me, I'd never believed that story had any significance, but it was like there was a Mr. Hyde. That there was something in me, it was like a werewolf. We better watch it. There may be parts of all of us that are best left alone. There could be Dr. Faustus's nephew. The feeling that they're uncharted, undeveloped, just who knows what. The people are rather indifferent to it. Now, you weren't. People who actually get involved with this and pursue it, they have a real interest in it. It starts out still in our day and time that it's almost like exception with you people and probably in our lifetime. At least the majority, the vast majority, still feel as though it is a spiritual calling of some kind that has something to do with guides. And I repeat right now what I'm trying to point toward when I say guides is to the ordinary people back in the city. It's that whatever may be going on out here, if there is something going on out there, some superior group of people, some superior knowledge, whatever it is, has no direct human connection. We cannot aspire to it. If there is secret knowledge out here, we can't have it. Or if in some way we could have it, like it was a book, and we got it, we wouldn't understand it. Or if there could be people that could do things we couldn't, and they're out there, it'd just scare the shit out of us. Now, it would be meaningless, so they might as well be gods. They might as well be physically up in the skies. They might as well physically be on top of inaccessible mountains. You start out with that feeling because it's still based upon the fact that everything, every square inch of you has not been developed. The real estate people have not cemented every square inch in you like they have attempted to do in Manhattan and Atlanta and LA and Miami, there's still here and there, under a bridge, down in a culvert, there are areas where they can find winos, tramps, people living in cardboard boxes, people laying out in the weeds. Everybody is not completely cemented over. Your internal city has not been developed to every square inch. There are the bushes in everyone. But the people, regardless of you individually here, and perhaps seeing this at some other time and place by tape, as interested as you may think you were, as interested as you seem to have been, as much as you may now believe that this is what you were born to do, and that other people have got the same kind of undeveloped areas in them, and that they should be very happy to hear about this and anything that you can learn and help others, I repeat to you, and you should be able to begin to see this. In general, the people in the city are rather indifferent. They know it's there, and you might have to use or try 2 or 3 different terms before the people in any particular city go, oh yeah, that area. You might have to use religious terms. You might have to fall into psychological terms. You might have to speak about it more theoretically from an intellectual approach. But everyone is going to admit, oh yeah, I got that area. We all do. Yeah, that's true. Using your pictures, that's true. There's this bushy area right outside the city limits in all of us. That's true. That's true. But if you're waiting for them to go, now that you mention it, why? Do you know some use for that? Is there some maps out there that would be worthwhile? By and large, they are rather indifferent. And there's a reason. But you imagine otherwise. Or you would have once I use this description. And there is a kind, I repeat one more time before I move on, there is a kind of fear and reverence for it that in times past, or in past times that are still now, in certain cities, it is the source of dreams of gods, and of course anti-gods, the unknown, death, bad luck, hemorrhoids, having them call you in for an audit. But by and large, insofar as it having any personal potential significance, the people in all states, everywhere, the people in the city, in those individual states, are rather indifferent to the bushes. Something else in the city. Life, here's another example of life having made things, I'm going to give you another specific example, apparently become so trite that any potential rebellious fuel that might have been in what I'm about to repeat is now gone. And this trite idea now is, quote, everything is relative. Everybody says that. I bet there are people in the bushes of New Guinea that never even heard of Einstein. I'll bet you by now that they can be out there arguing over, who's got the biggest kumquats in the village. And somebody in their native tongue is going to make some comment about, well, when you get down to it, everything's relative. And somebody's going to go, yeah. But if it hadn't been so, it's like a biscuit that's been used up. Not eaten up, but it's like a biscuit that almost everybody on this planet has had in their hand at one time and tried to get up a little gravy with it, and then they passed it along. But there is the heart of any revolution, even today, is everything is relative. All right. But there are limits to that, of course. But in the city, everything is relative. Is relative. And relative is a beautiful word in English because it has an additional connotation. is everything in the city, of course, is binary, but that's the operational way in which 3D consciousness uses everything, of the two forces involved, the two, and then everything else. If I insist, if I made them say, hey, don't forget E, damn it, is the two things under consideration that make up this problem, this potential, this situation. And okay, we've got to keep him quiet. The E, that is, everything else that has got nothing to do with it. But the binary consciousness in the city, back to everything is relative, in one definition of the word relative, is that all of the binary aspects are real close kin. We're talking about close relative, folks. I mean, I'm talking about close, a lot closer than, for instance, mother and child. I'm talking about real close. When you talk about heads and tails of one coin, you're talking about a blood relationship. You're talking about heads and tails being close relatives. To say everything's relative, that's true enough. But in the city, everything is real relative. Binary concepts could not be closer kin. The idea of people, things being related, that somebody's a relative of somebody else, that's one thing. But in the binary aspects of city life, everything is real relative. The kinship is real close, real close. Part of the binary aspect I want to push on for a few minutes. Let me jump back to that old turn of the century attempted fantasy story, as best I'm misusing it, was Flattened Land. If you're back picturing if there could be a two-dimensional world in which beings were conscious, and you're trying to picture now that like your view of consciousness would just be two-directional. It's out here and in this way. It's like you could see the surface of water, or that you're down at just the minute topsoil of a desert that just runs endlessly, and that's all you see. And then we use the example that inside, go back to water, where it sounds like it's physically possible, and you have this large wheel of different colors, painted like pie pieces cut up, and it goes through the water at times, and there at consciousness you only see one thing at a time that seems to pop in and out. Well, let's see if I can complicate it a little bit. Imagine that you are conscious at that level, and this pair of scissors comes down, and now your consciousness of it just going in those two directions, you would see the two arms of the scissors, that they're right there on that field, little bitty field of vision. And it would be as though there were two, let's say if they got different colors if you've got to, you know, green and red. And they apparently, that you see these things that just came from nowhere, it'd be like two new forces, two new things, two new somethings, but they would seem to be in a kind of conflict. They would continue to run together, and they'd back off, and they'd come together, and it would be like almost two armies, two celestial, two occult, mystical armies are down here, and now they periodically run together, and they make noise, and they go cloom, and then they run back apart like they're both afraid. All right. But all you'd have to do, if you had 3D consciousness, if you were now a human, and you look down at this, and you're aware that there was little creatures down there whose consciousness was on the level of that paper, and that was all they had, and that scissors, what they were seeing that they imagined was these two forces coming together and clashing and making noise and then separating and running back apart and then coming back together, you would see that scissors are not two things. Scissors are one thing. And that these two, the cutting blades of the scissors, are not fighting one another. If anything, based upon the purpose of scissors, when they do this, they are working as they were designed, as they were constructed and as they are operationally intended to do. And so the creatures there see one thing, their best sight, the wisest two-dimensional creatures based upon imperfect information. They would be seeing things at one level that would apparently be binary. And we're going to have to turn the tape over here for a second, and I'll pick it back up. Back in the city, back in flatland, they can say from their view that everything is relative. They could have said in flatland that these two opposing forces, which were actually the two arms of a unified structure, the institution of scissors, there could be discussions then in flatland about which side, which army one person liked. That I like the green army. Then an intellectual inclined two-dimensional person back in flatland could say, well, I sort of feel the same way, but I'll bet you that the other army, I bet some of them are good mothers and fathers, and they probably send money home to their grandparents. So it all seems to be relative. The higher view, the higher truth, the higher correctness, the higher information to the idea of it's all relative would be if you were at least one-dimensionally more conscious to where you saw that, yeah, it is all relative, but not on the basis that you two-dimensional people think, that two-dimensional consciousness thinks that it's relative, that there is something good to be said about probably both forces, or to even say something bad about one of these forces, you've got to say, well, it's relatively speaking compared to the other questionable or possible values of the other force. To them, that's what's relative. They can say, well, that's relative, and it passes for being intellectual. But from a higher view, the reality, the real information to say everything is relative is to say it's relative because you think it's two forces going on and it's one thing. There is the relativity. When you can get into at least one-dimensional view higher than what's going on, then it consolidates. It begins to swallow what appears to be X number of dimensional relative conflicts, situations, possibilities. That is, a three-dimensional consciousness could see that what two-dimensional appears to be two is one. The kid wants to know if I'm going to carry that any further. All right. Then what could appear to be X on one level, at another level, a higher view, a more complex view, a view with at least a greater dimension to it, will swallow, will consolidate what appears to be a greater multiplicity of factors going on, and three can be seen as two. Two can be seen as one. It's not magic. Of course, it's magic to the lower dimension. It's unbelievable. It's theoretical. It's dreaming. But at that level of consciousness, it is literally impossible to tell two-dimensional creatures, two-dimensional consciousness, that what you see, I know what you see, it's this great green horde. It's almost unidentifiable. It sweeps the whole quadrant over here of the desert, of your reality. Yes, that's true. And every time they show up, like clockwork, this other army pops out of nowhere, this red horde, and they rush at each other, just barely missing you each time. They rush at each other, and when they hit, it's the damnedest noise you've ever heard. We've never seen such forces as this. Can't even identify it. And then they'll hit, and it's this noise, and everything shakes. And man, it's like magic. They all run back apart, and then they disappear. I guess they'd finally come up with their own version of two-dimensional Hindu concepts of Brahma breathing in and breathing out and destroying the universe and then bringing it back in. Maybe it doesn't destroy theirs, but it sure as hell would scare them to death. That these great things run and go crash, and they run back and they disappear. If you had at least one greater degree of dimensional consciousness, you would see that the relativity they speak of is very simplistic relativity. And it's relativity for them to say, to talk about the red force as opposed to the green armies. And for them to talk about everything is relative, is to talk about, it's not just childish, it's not just erroneous. You've got to see that it was their best view based upon incomplete pictures. It's their best ideas founded on imperfect information. So if you, from another view, to say everything is relative, you have now made that a much more complex. It is swallowing up their relativity. It is swallowing up their contradictions. It has swallowed up, consolidated, and explained to them what would be mystical occurrences, inexplicable forces dropping into our lives. The thing I was pointing at, or trying to specifically, is that which appeared in their case to be two different forces, where they thought them as being armies, mystical fields of some kind. They are not two separate forces. It is not two things. All you would have to do is be able to get above that level and become three-dimensional, and it's a pair of scissors. It is a one-piece thing that moves. It not only moves, but it does not move in forces. It is not two things. All you would have to do is be able to get above that level and become three-dimensional, and it's a pair of scissors. It is a one-piece thing that moves. It not only moves, but it does not move in conflict. It's not at war with itself. It moves to do something beneficial to a three-dimensional creature. And it's unified. A pair of scissors is a one thing, as we all know. It is not a plurality. There are not two scissors in a pair of scissors. What would appear at one level to be binary is unified. Some more matters in the city that continue to spring up, and I might as well use them. Things that apparently are matters in the city. One of them that comes up periodically amongst you people, and it happens out in the city with ordinary people. But I'll just, good a time as any to use it for an example, is people who find themselves in front of an audience, such as you people at times doing these public programs that I've led you to do, told you to do. And as I repeat, out in the ordinary cities, people have had occasion to note this. If somebody seems to be, let's say they're in a play, well, they could be a singer, reading their poetry, doing something, and it seems to be them attempting to be the dominant one. It's them on stage. It's like I'm singing and dancing, and there's the audience for tonight. And at times people note that apparently I can come out, and I don't know, even before I go on, I just know I'm really up for it tonight, and I can go out there, and it's almost predictable. It's some kind of magic. I can get going, I can gets to my lines in the play, or it's my time to sing and dance, and by God, it's almost like I can pour some kind of electricity across the footlights, and it's like I can convey some energy to the audience. It's great. And it's always as though, in some way, they give it back. After such a night, I feel very enthused, and that's when we go out and we stay up all night reading the reviews or discussing showbiz type stuff. Then there are nights that apparently I come in and I'm kind of down. But if I can make myself go out there, go ahead and pull my makeup, make sure I got my lines right and I know where the cues are, and many times I can go out there and it's as though the audience themselves brought in this energy. I don't know, maybe the reputation of the play, maybe they all had good food, Maybe their stars were in the right houses. But some nights I can come out, and if I can just get myself going, it's even though it's almost as though I didn't have any magic that night. And by God, many nights, it's like they brought it with them. And after a few minutes, I get it. And I can get going, and it's like I can return something to them, and then they get going more. And again, it's a kind of magic. And then, sometimes it seems like I don't have it, and they ain't got it. All right, individually, many of you have brought up subjects similar to this. And I note for you again, this is not an unknown area of discussion back in the city amongst the ordinary people. But many of you have asked me, or some of you have asked me specifically, what in the hell is going on? How could I use it? Why does I seem to have it? And etc. All right. Now, this appears to be city matters. Now, what it appears to be with this idea, let's call it stage energy. Apparently, sometimes I got it, sometimes I don't. Apparently, sometimes the audience has it, and sometimes they don't. Apparently, some nights we both got it. Apparently, some nights neither one of us have it. But the times either I or the audience has it, it's almost as though this happens, that if I've got it and they don't, then they pick up some from me, and in some way they seem to even enlarge upon it. And then I get some of it back. Or if I don't have it and they got it, it's like I get some and then I give them some back. We are apparently dealing in the three-dimensional world with a closed system. How can I be producing energy? How can I give the audience energy? How can they give me energy? That seems strange enough from one view. But how could I willfully in some way? Now let's, instead of talking about the ordinary people, let's talk about you people. And let us say that you were putting on a play. That I had you people, whoever's involved with this, that I had you involved with writing plays and producing them on a continuing basis to the public, trying to reflect your understanding of what we're doing here in some way. And then you began to ask me, well, how can I make myself go out, even when I don't seem to naturally feel it, on some night, and go out there and give some kind of energized performance to apparently pass along some of the energy, not just the words, not just the verbal sound waves reflecting these ideas that we've written in the play, but that I in some way can take this, whatever it is, this energy, and I can kind of fake it, or I can drag it in from somewhere when I don't have it and throw it out to the audience. Sounds like a valid description, a valid question, but then you should be left with, all right, that seems to be true, and I'm asking you if there's a trick. If there is a trick, good grief. Topographically, where would such energy come from? It sounds like a trick that can be done, surely, but if you tell me, even before I try it out, I want to know this, how did I suddenly come up with this energy? How can I make it up? It seems to be a closed system in which we live. It seems to be a closed energy system. This whole universe, everyone's personal state, everyone's individual city, and what seems to be individual, binary relationships, a man and a woman. Friends, but let's assume it's a sexual relationship. It seems to be a closed system. If you begin to apparently lose interest in each other, or one of you loses interest, and no one begins to sense it. Now in the city, I know some strange things go on. I've been in there before. But if you believe that one person really begins to lose the energy in a relationship, and the other person in some way is going to make up for it, I don't know. I don't know how long you plan to live. Back in the city, I'm still, can we use somewhat facetious terminology? I was going to say I'm still somewhat curious as to what kind of strange energies ordinary people put up with and call it a relationship. But to believe that you are in some way in the city, ordinary people, you're going to start producing the energy to revitalize a relationship, say. You have a very out of date, you have in fact out of sorts view of physics. You do not know how thermodynamics actually operate. But of course, if you don't believe in it, as the kid said, maybe it'll go away. You apparently have a closed system. There should be no way that you could come out and produce energy. Maybe you're going to ask me a trick. Maybe I say, all right, come out and just play like you're real enthusiastic. Yeah, but playing like is not the real thing. The real revolutionist has got to insert himself in the loop. Going back to the wonderful battle stance, preparatory posture of anacronyms, in such areas as this, of apparently the question of producing energy within a closed system, that apparently is impossible is the point. There's nowhere to get it from. The real revolutionist has got to operate on the basis of everyone remembers that one, don't you? That's the lowest level. You've got to operate on the basis of be that as it may. The step up from that, I could call that the beginning recruit stage, but to shorten it a bit, to intensify it, or I intend this to convey an intensity, you need to move up from that to even which is the revolutionary approach of never mind all that. That is, in this case, if you're following any of this, the question of how can I come out with a group of people to do my performance tonight and I feel like duck squat. I've got no energy. I'm not even going to tell you how bad I feel. I'm not going to tell you all the terrible things that's happened to me in the last 24 hours. Never mind all that. But I don't have the energy. There's nowhere to produce it. Even if I'm just theorizing now, even if I really ask you and you tell me some story like, well, go out there and just ignore what you're saying is your problems. And maybe think back last week, the last performance. Were you really enthused and was it a good show? Yes, as a matter of fact, it was. And then you're maybe thinking to yourself, fearing, well, he's going to say something like, well, come out and just try and act like you acted last week. Just kind of fake it if you can't make it, right? But that's not possible. If I don't have the energy, where am I going to get it? How am I going to walk out? It's showtime. I leave the dressing rooms, I come out. Where am I going to get this energy? If I don't have it, if it's not here, whatever the reason, if it's not here, what am I going to do? And within a closed system, as this apparently be, that's a fact. Except for this. Never mind all that. You should also remember it. It's only 3D stuff that's impossible in a 3D world. Of course, there are higher degrees, higher orders are impossible, but the original level at which you should be interested is to take the 3D world. And we point out it's only 3D stuff that's impossible. That's all. That's all. The real revolutionist, to do anything, has got to get out of the city. You cannot attempt to stage, you cannot even properly plan a revolution. And you certainly, of course, can't ever become active in a revolution without you having some kind of revolutionary leader. For any of this to happen, you have got to get out of the city. The kid, he wants me to remind you that I am not necessarily talking about really. We're filming this in the midst of a city. You people watching it. At least all of the fairly contemporary times, you're watching it in a city. You're not in a cabin in Alaska running your VCR off kerosene. Well, he wanted me to remind you. But I am telling you, beyond all this childish stuff, the revolutionist has got to get out of the city. In the city, city stuff is impossible. Or if you want the other way, in the city, only city stuff is possible. It's the same thing. The revolutionist, on the basis of never mind all that, has got to press on. You've got to have very soon some understanding about what I've mentioned for the last several times about planning for action, the thinking of action, and the action itself, and how the revolutionist finds out to a large degree. This is really a topographical question, but to a large degree, the ultimate action has little to do, if any, with the apparent plans for the action, except the action would have never occurred had it not been for the plans. This is all back into the dynamic area of NEMAT, that there seems to be a truthfulness of how things are arranged at any particular time back in the city. The people can all say it. And the kid wants me to remind you again, it may not be the people out there telling you, it's all the people in here telling you, you cannot do that. And we're not speaking now as some brainless, headless mass. We're telling you can't do that because that is a scientific fact here in the city, which of course is the only reality there is. But you can't do that. And the revolutionist, having not been born here in the bushes, none are, the revolutionist was born in the city. He had the same exposure to so-called education, culture, general run of influence as everyone else. The people in your city are never going to tell the revolutionist anything he doesn't know. And they say, what you're talking about is not possible. And the revolutionist knows full well that it's not. Not in the city. So what do you want to do? Do I have to describe the spectrum again? Do you want to give up? Do you want to lay down and take a nap? Do you want to wring your hands? Do you want to discuss it? Think of anything that's possible in the city, and I'll tell you what. It's a waste of time. When it's impossible, when it's known to be impossible, the revolutionist has got to have the attitude, the workable attitude of, oh, you know, okay, but never mind all that. And you have got to press on. What is your alternative? What is your topographical alternative in a 3D world? You have always got within the 3D universe what apparently are two forces running. The great blades of the three-dimensional pair of scissors. Well, all right, this is possible over here on the green side, but over here on the red side, it is not. That, no, we've got this not, no. No, this may be possible, but not this. All right, this may be true. Now, we might be able to operate on that basis, but if you're going to carry it so much further, what you're threatening to do, and you're going to bring it over here, that's no longer true. It's not possible. This is feasible. This is not. On that basis, nothing will happen. Nothing revolutionary. In the city, that is the norm. But in the bushes, it is not adequate. You have got to forcibly, if you can see it that way, insert yourself into this loop. What you're doing with the information, the perception, is simply a part of a loop from somewhere else. I'm not going to draw any more great complex pictures, but if this was the city, us, three-dimensionally, turned on its side, then you're dealing, let us say, instead of just a wheel, a loop of information, a loop of energy. And it seems to be closed, because at this level, there seems to be no production of energy, no destruction of energy, to use the classic that one law of physics, that matter, and of course nowadays we take matter scientifically as being synonymous or just being another manifestation of energy, that it is not capable of being produced here, and plus you can't destroy it, which is a corollary of it. That it is a closed system of some kind, taking into consideration, of course, much of the city's attitude when pressed that, all right, there's got to be a guide, which is like the safety valve. It is like a non-personal egress into or out of the closed loop. The revolutionist has got to simply, forcefully, irrationally insert yourself into what would be the closed loop. In other words, it's not possible to do what you just described. Right. It is not possible for a person to be treated the way you've just been treated and not be blank by it. Fill it in. Hurt, mad, pissed, crushed, defeated, human. That you fall within these perimeters. You must operate this way, or conversely, you cannot operate the way you're imagining, the way you're hearing it, the way that you've just been told. You cannot simply produce energy. That's true enough, I guess. But be that as it may, never mind all that, you insert yourself forcefully in what appears to be a closed loop that you can't produce energy. Okay. Ha! God damn. Just give me just 2 or 3 seconds. However the part starts, they think, oh, as energized as you seem to have been just naturally. Last week, is this time you leap up on the stage in such a manner as you would make Douglas Fairbanks Jr. physically and otherwise appear to be taking a nap. And I guess some of the people in the city could say, well, if you're going to push it that far, I don't know, something might come of that. It would be meaningless, right? It wouldn't prove anything, yeah. Plus, it would only work just then. Well, plus, if it did appear to work, it'd be a sham. I'd know better. Well, yeah, I guess maybe I did kind of fool people, but then that's what show business is, but that's not what I was talking about. I want to know how to actually produce some new energy and do it like I did last week. And what you're saying, I don't know, it might apparently work a little, but it's not the same thing. I'm going to tell you, in the city, it's hard to pull the wool over their eyes. You can't fool the people in the city the way you used to. The real revolutionist would press on. He would press on regardless of plans. He would press on regardless of lack of plans. He would press on regardless of apparent lack of action. He would press on apparently with his inability to act appropriately. He would press on when he seemed to be sans any notion of how to press on. As long as he was dealing with this kind of attitude, this kind of attempt, if nothing else, he would try and keep this glorious. Revolutionary, an acronym in mind of, yeah, I know, but never mind all that. You don't need some Latin philosophical phrase. You don't need some Greek prayer to the gods. You don't need some Hindu chant to 14-armed statues. If you could remember, never mind all that. That includes all possible combinations of plans, lack of plans, actions, apparent inability to appropriately act, apparently lack of plans as to how to act appropriately. Any combination that could all be pointed out. The people in you could point out there's some combination of that absolutely at hand here. The controlling factor is some combination of that, and you cannot, or either you will not, either you do not have the time, or either you do not have the resolve to argue. To within the batting of a split eye, you could nod, yeah, I know what you mean, and never mind all that. Reminding you also, I point out that when the people say something is impossible, you should be, from last time we met, you should inquire on your own. Does that mean, when people say that, the people, do they mean that they lack the means to do something when they say it's impossible? Or are they saying we lack the resolve to do it? And I also point out to you that in a real particular sense, not a two-dimensional and certainly not even a three-dimensional sense, the real revolutionist would never lack the means. But even if he did lack the means, he would refuse to believe it. He would refuse to accept it if he did lack the means. Out in the bushes, there is always revolutionary moves available. Always. And as long as I'm here, let me tie a few more things. I'll use another area that continues to pop up that apparently, from one view, are matters again in the city, and that is what seems to be boredom. And I get questions from you people, I get inquiring looks, and I even bring it up myself at times, talking about what appears at times to be a very pressing condition of ennui. I've laughed, sort of, and made comments about some of you feeling as though you moved from one minor, simplistic stage of boredom now to greater, more enlightened, more complex stages of being bored. And people ask me, what can I do? They ask me directly and they ask me otherwise. First, let me remind you, you have got to get out of the city. Everything in the city you've already done. Everything in the city, whether you know it or not, when you begin to reach these new levels, everything in the city now you understand. You understand enough that it is boring, it is predictable, it is the biscuit that has been handed to almost everybody alive on this planet. You have got to get out of the city. There are no new shows coming into the city. There are no new films. There are no new books. In the city, there is no new information available. You just never noticed it. They show the same 2 or 3 movies year in and year out. They change the name of it. See, you understood that, but you didn't know you understood that. You didn't know it. You understood it. There's only 2 or 3 books that's ever been written. They put new covers on, they changed the name, they put a new author, and they got somebody somewhere, it may be a machine that churns out new prefaces, new forwards. There is nothing new in the city. You have got to get out of the city to start correctly, if you want to very quickly, dealing with what seems to be this question of boredom. And some of the real quick obvious things I'll re-mention to you. To get out of the city, then attempt to do either that which is new, attempt to overdo that which is old, and something else about the city. There's a term that I feel all of you know about. They're playing my song, such as couples sometimes somebody mentioned they're playing our song, honey, and they seemed to identify some melody that reminded them of their first date. Or you might have a man, ex-part of the military, nice and fat and leaning to the right, and he hears some martial music being played, and he may turn to one of his buddies there at the American Legion Hall and say, "Ha, they're playing my song, the Marine Corps hymn. They're playing my song." All right. In the city, they're playing everybody's song. Everybody's song is being played in the city. It doesn't matter who you are. No matter whether you're lean, fat, leaning to the right, leaning to the left, down the center of the road as a reformed humanist, no matter what team you were born on, no matter what position you seem to play on the team, in the city, somewhere, at any time, day or night, they're playing your song. They're playing songs that seem to strike any particular neighborhood as they're playing our song. But then if you even could push yourself back in the city to be the kind of person who says, hey, everything's relative, you'd realize, well, they're even playing songs somewhere of our enemies. The bad neighborhoods in the city, their songs are being played. There's a station somewhere, wherever the source of this is, that everybody's song is being played. The city never sleeps. The music never stops. Every neighborhood, no matter how foreign it may seem to yours, no matter how despicable, no matter how unmusical, no matter how uncouth, everybody's song is always being played. Now back to me telling you got to get out of the city to do the new, overdo the old. Here's another way to look at it, is don't ever let them play your song. And if they do, change it. If you get out of the city, there's something else you can do. There's always, whenever you can, attempt to do the unexpected at inappropriate times. And any of you who find that to sound a bit harsh for a beginner, then you could try this. You could do the unexpected at inappropriate times. Whichever may seem to be the most inviting to you at this point in what? Kid said time. But I knew he could finish that one. I used to refer to him as the master of cliches. And once, though, he thought I said the master of ceremonies, and he came out and tried to take over. No, master of cliches, cliches, cliches. Stay where you are. Along the same bushy knoll outside the city here, let me mention for tonight what could be. I'll surely, probably take this to further flight sometime to another dimension, but you could look at it now as being a new motto for the revolutionists. New bushy words to live by, and it's this. I guess I'll repeat it at least once so that many of your people think, what? I didn't hear that. If something seems to last beyond the initial flash, it's meaningless. If it seems to last beyond the initial flash, it's meaningless. Somebody even had the nerve recently after we'd been sort of chitting about this and that they wondered if there was any possibility that there might be something positive to be said about a kind of, and they hesitated because they were about to use a cliche, if there could be any possible positive aspect to some kind of new form or a new manifestation of short attention span, because they feared in a way that they were beginning to suffer over it. And it seemed that the world was getting worse from being around this. There was validity in the person using those terms and bringing it up, but you'd need to see this. You'd need to see in the city the term short attention span, you do understand, is used in a negative sense. That people can't seem to keep their attention focused, and they even blame it on television and commercials, and that the average person now can only pay attention to something for 30 seconds from watching MTV, and if something hadn't happened, they look somewhere else, and boy, you know, Isaac Newton would have never caught a fish on that basis. But what the person was experiencing and attempting to ask me is there is really a way in which what they refer to in the city as a short attention span could be translated into something else. It would have to go from the 3D world of the city, of them saying, well, a short attention span. You'd have to see that that would translate, if you could take it into a 4D reality out in the bushes. You could look at more as a living dynamic of yet another one of our favorite bush-worthy anacronyms. You got to keep moving. But everything in the city, especially intelligent, spiritually inclined people, even just reasonable people, know that you've got to have something better than a run-of-the-mill short attention span. Once you begin to find the truth, some new truth, you got to hang on to it. You got to build from there. If you got some truth, somewhere to start, you got to be able, in some logical, some reasonable, some beneficial at the very least, sequence has got to unfold from the first discovery, from the first central truth. You got to stay somewhere. You got to put down roots, not just physically, but intellectually and otherwise, to orient yourself here in this new intellectual area. Part of the proof being, back in the city, is the cohesive history of institutions, a continuity, wisdom being passed down from generation to generation, the real great secret cosmic inner truths remaining constant and true. God's being unchangeable. And of course, as always back in the city, they talk like that. If it lasts beyond the initial flash, it's meaningless. And you got to keep moving. Does anybody remember that I asked you when we started tonight's tape? Have any of you been sensing that there seems to be a need somewhere for me to tell you more and more, sort of faster and faster, and with less and less of some other stuff? Some of you are already having the experience, not being required that you feel as though your attention span is shrinking. But enough of you are having experience now that you should be able to be big boys and girls and face up to the fact you almost have a new mystical experience. Let's say once a month. And once a month would carry you. It was like you could use this piece of a new map. It was good for a month of wandering around in new areas and putting pieces together, and it seemed to draw in more and more, and it seemed to connect with this and that. It would go for days. And then you find yourself, hey, I got another 2 weeks and it seems to all be gone, and I'm 2 weeks off. Then you find you're 3 weeks off. Then you find, hey, I never thought about it in this way, but I just had what previously to me was an almost gut-wrenching, knockdown, mystical experience that used to last me a month. And hell, it was 5 minutes ago, and what else is new? I hate to put words in their little mouths, but in the city, if they knew about such as this, they'd tell you, Jack, there ain't no justice. That you should have known, and that you should have known that before you went out in the bushes. You could have stayed in the city and been pushed around, even mugged. But if you went out there and hung around the bushes and got wet and cold and isolated yourself in a certain way, and then decide what's new, you can't wait for any kind of pity from the city. There's one other way, let me point out, about boredom, as you people, some of you want to call it, which may at first sound pretty far removed from the way I was discussing it, but let me point out to you that from a certain real view, the kind of boredom that most of you still are feeling that causes you to want to ask such questions, that even that kind of boredom, maybe we'll call it boredom in the bushes, can be seen truly as being a definite improvement over the kind of erstwhile city excitement of guilt, fear, self-pity, continual suffering, that now at times that might make you use such terms that I can understand the motivation behind of saying it seems that there is less and less to do, or I seem to be incurring more and more a feeling of kind of vague boredom the further I do this. But remember, you're not that far removed. You can always be recaptured. You can always go back. You can always be sucked back. Just remember how long ago, how recent it was that you didn't feel this kind of boredom, but what is it that you have overcome? What is it you have given up? What is it that you now miss that made life exciting? I used to constantly feel bad. No, not just bad, I used to constantly worry. I'd wake up in the morning worrying. I worried about death. I worried about, well, hell, I worried about things worse than death. I worried about the process that would lead to sickness. That's it, sickness. And I used to worry that I'm not going to live long enough to read about all the illnesses that I may have. I may die from things I didn't know about. I feel so unworthy. I'm afraid I'll die before I travel around far enough in the city so that more and more people can observe my unworthiness and be aware of it. I guess to some people in the city it might sound like a hell of a price to pay or no price to pay, but I got to point out to you that you should remember, I'm not using this as a finite response to your feelings, or you might have a boredom, but you should be able to see that what may now seem to be some passing boredom in the bushes is a definite improvement over the things that used to keep you excited back in the city. And if you don't see that, maybe you should go back to the city. They hadn't closed it up. And the city never sleeps. There's always something to do in the city. There's something else about the city. I'll use another clue. What? Shay. Just want to make sure he was listening. Everybody's heard this, the term, don't take it personally. All right, let me point out something that you're not aware of. You're not supposed to be, because Topographically, it is described one way, but it exists with parts of it going into another dimension. So that the information that people believe is being conveyed by the term "don't take it personally" is very lacking. It's totally lacking for any revolutionary purpose. But here's the point. In the city, people are always talking about "don't take it personally." But apparently in the city, people do take things personally, right? People say, well, I take things too personally. I take criticism too personally. I hear a comment about my neighborhood and I take it personally. Or so-and-so, oh, Fred, he's always taking things too personally. That's why he's so upset. That's why he's got ulcers. That's why that the company's wanting to send him to a psychologist. He just takes things too personally. In the city, nobody takes anything personally. Now, they say they do. They say it's possible. They say other people do. And that is a part of the operational, imperfect topographical nature of something that verbally and then even intellectually sounds as though it's correct and is making a unified statement about something. And it's not. It's not even true. People do not take anything personally in the city. Even when they apparently are taking things personally, they are accepting what at first glance might appear to be a serious body blow to their intelligence, to some ism of their neighborhood, their race, their religion, their family. An insult, a question, a verbal, a laboratory attack. But people do not take things personally in the city. Nobody does. When they feel the blow, check with the people in you, here it comes. They take the blow, but they feel it as them being a part of a network. The entire universe, the entire world of man, their own state, their own city, their own neighborhood, their own family absorbs part of the blow. If you want to jump now to a molecular level, the genes of each person individually, in a way that no one can analyze, no one has ever attempted, but it's there. They take the blow, and you take it as only being one molecular part of the whole genetic, the whole molecular makeup of mankind. People do not take a blow personally. They do not. You do not. The genes cannot. They take the blow as a large segment of us have been hit. And they do not take it personally. They do not. The revolutionist is the only person that can take anything serious or personally. And if you cannot take something personally, you cannot see it, and you cannot learn from the thing, and you cannot learn about the thing. Thing I'm using in the sense of anything. When I say that in the city, no one takes anything personally. The revolutionist takes things personally, because if you do not, of course we're not talking about ordinary city definitions of personally, you know that. But if he does not take things personally, he cannot see them, he cannot learn about the thing, and he cannot learn from the thing. But no one else takes it personally. In the city, it doesn't matter that someone says, hey, I was sitting in a restaurant and somebody walked in with a gun and hollered, I'm going to shoot. Anybody here that's Italian? Or somebody stuck their head in the door and hollered, fuck the Irish. Yeah, I took it personally. I got in a fight. I ended up in jail. How's that for personal? He did not take it personally. He did not. He took it as a part of a genetic pattern. He took it as a body blow to a team. His neighborhood was hit. His family was insulted. It was a large segment of genetic molecules. And it's not just in him because he's only a part. He did not take it personally. It takes a willful, it takes a knowing attempt. It takes what, from one city view, is an unnatural, unnecessary attempt that you have got to take things personally. Not in the sense, of course, of being offended. But what happened, you got to take personally. If you don't take it personally, it's gone. If you don't take it personally, you cannot see it. If you don't take it personally, it's just que sera. It's just, hey, that's life. It's just, hey, they're playing everybody's song. It's, hey, it's all relative. The revolutionist takes everything that he can. You have a finite amount of energy living out your days in this particular state. But the real revolutionist attempts to take everything personally. No matter what it is. If you don't take it personally, you can't do anything with it. You can't learn from it. You can't learn about it. We have run out of tape, and I've got to stop. Over and out.